everyone, welcome to Professor Orthodontics, your online classroom to understanding orthodontics in simpler terms. Today we learn about Adam's clasp, also called as universal clasp, also called as modified arrowhead clasp. So let's begin. In this picture we can see Adam's clasp, which is engaging the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercut of a first permanent molar. Charles Phillips Adams was the designer and the creator of Adam's clasp. It's also called as modified arrowhead clasp because the precursor of this clasp was the arrowhead clasp. Now, arrowhead clasp consisted of giant arrowhead shaped patterns which filled the gap between two adjacent teeth. So basically, there were giant arrowhead shaped spokes that were engaged in the embrasure of adjacent teeth. So imagine a tooth which has no tooth anterior or posterior to it. Imagine in this scenario if you had a first permanent molar standing alone with no second premolar and absent second permanent molar. In that case, we could not use arrowhead clasp because the entire basis of arrowhead clasp retention was the embrasure between two adjacent teeth. So in such cases, modified arrowhead clasp, today we call it Adam's clasp, is quite useful. All that Adam's clasp needs is just 0.25 mm of undercut. If even that much of undercut is present on the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal surface of the tooth, it can manage to retain on a tooth efficiently. To fabricate Adam's clasp, you can use almost any plier, but C.P. Adams advocates the use of Adams universal plier. So we'll learn a little about that. The first two pliers we can see are nothing but Adams universal plier. They are called universal plier because you can fabricate almost any orthodontic removable appliance wire component with that, except the ones that need curvature, for example loops or springs or the bow of the label bow. In that case, obviously, the Adams universal plier will not be very helpful. The lower one, the last plier we can see over here, is a spring forming plier, but we'll not talk about that today. Let's stick to Adams universal plier for now. Now, how do you select a good Adams universal plier? I'll not get into the technical details of it because that becomes too much for this lecture. So let's stick to just the basics. When you place a straight wire of 1 mm thickness between the two beaks of the Adams universal plier and you hold it tight in place, the beaks of both both left and right beaks of the plier should run parallel to the wire. So that means that the gap between your hinge and the gap between the beaks is just the right amount. On the right side of this picture, we can see that the beaks of the plier is open. Okay, you can clearly see that the inner surface of the beak of the plier is rough, and that's exactly how it should be. If the inner surface of the beaks of the plier is smooth or polished, the wire will slip between the beaks and will not hold itself in place. And if this happens, if your inner surface is polished or it is smooth, your plier is as good as useless because it cannot hold the wire in place. On the left side of the diagram, we can see that the outer edges of the beak as well as the inner edge of the beak is sharp, and it should not be rounded or beveled because these edges on the outside of the beak as well as on the inside of the beak. Let me show it with a laser pointer first. So this is the beak with the inner edges. You can see that the edge is quite sharp. Even on the above beak, you can see that the inner edge is quite sharp. It is not beveled or rounded. Similarly, the outer edge of the beak is also sharp. Over here you can see that outer edge is sharp. It is still sharp. There is no beveling or no rounding off because these outer as well as inner edges are used efficiently during the wire bendings, so nothing of this is waste. The tip of the beak is supposed to be sharp. It is not supposed to be rounded off. It is supposed to be sharp. It shouldn't be blunt because this also plays a role when you make the arrowheads of the plier of the clasp. Sorry. The arrowheads are completed and the wire is running to the occlusal surface. When we fabricate Adam's clasp for premolar, we have to make sure that it is not too short and it is not too broad, because obviously the molars are wider and they are larger, so we are used to fabricating clasps of that size. But for premolar, because the undercut is smaller, the tooth is smaller in size, the mesiodistal width of the clasp will also be small, and hence we may miss the undercut if we keep it too wide. If the bridge of the clasp is too wide even for a premolar, we'll end up missing the mesiobuccal and retrobuccal undercut, which is supposed to be engaged by the clasp. This is a very beautifully written article by J.I.J. Green in British Dental Journal. At the end of the presentation in the comment section, I'll leave a link to this site, so please go and visit the site. It's a well written article and all the pictures of wire bendings are very clear in this article. So yeah, please make sure that you visit the site and go through the article. It's a very good article on Adam's clasp. It's basically a review article on Adam's clasp, so fabrication and types of Adam's clasp are also covered in that. So let's get started on the wire bending part of Adam's clasp. Before you start fabricating Adam's clasp, first you have to check if the cast is okay. You have to make sure that the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercuts are clearly visible on the cast. Say it is a partly erupted tooth and the distobuccal undercut is not clearly seen, or even the mesiobuccal undercut is yet to be clearly visible. Then what we can do is we can observe the cast, observe the tooth, and based on that we can predict where the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercut will be present. Obviously, if we are seeing it on the cast, then we are not seeing the actual height of the crown. We are seeing only the clinical height of the crown. So in that case, the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercut will be gingival, will be apical to the cervical gingiva. So what we have to do is just take a chisel and scrape off that excess gingiva which is blocking the probable position of the mesiobuccal and distobuccal undercut. Make sure that both the undercuts are clearly visible. Mark them with your marker and start the wire bending process. You can also mark half the vertical height of the crown with the help of a marker, and the long axis of the tooth also can be marked on the tooth so as to obtain a guidance when you are fabricating the Adam's clasp. The first bend that is to be placed on a straightened wire of 0.7 mm thickness is the mesiobuccal right angle bend, which is seen in the picture 1. In the picture 2, the second distobuccal bend is placed. Now what we have is two 90-degree bends on a straight wire. Once that is done, one of the free ends, either the mesiobuccal or the distobuccal, can be held in place with the tip of the Adams universal plier, and now comes the purpose of having a sharp external bevel, a sharp outer edge of the beak. So we can see here in the picture 4, the wire is twisted not just 90-degree but another 90-degree. So you can see that all the way from step 2 to step 3 we have gone 90-degree and we have placed the 90-degree bend in fabrication of the arrowhead, and from step 3 to step 4 we have placed another 90-degree bend. So we can say that we have placed a 180-degree bend and we have formed an arrowhead. Now this arrowhead should be such that it is at 45 degree to the buccal surface of the tooth. So it should not be 90 degree and it should not stand out on the buccal surface of the tooth. So this arrowhead is placed on both the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal end of the wire. So now we have two arrowheads which we can see in figure 5. Then we have to modify both the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal arrowhead so that they are not 90 degree but instead they are slightly curving along the buccal surface of the tooth. So basically they are following the contour of the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercut. In figure 6, we place the partly done clasp on the buccal surface of the tooth, and we see if it is properly following the contour of the mesiobuccal and distobuccal undercut, and at the same time if it is following the cervical gingival line. Okay, so now we are done with the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal arrowheads, and we are done with contouring it. So now we have to fabricate the third bend, which is to be placed at half the height of the arrowhead, which is being done in figure 7 and figure 8. After we are done with that, we have to make sure that this wire passes to the occlusal surface passively in the embrasure gap between two adjacent teeth, which is being done in figure 9. When this step is taking place, you have to make sure of two things. First of all, make sure that the bridge of the clasp is 45 degrees to the buccal surface of the molar. Secondly, you have to make sure that the occlusally running wire is not running haywire, and that wire is running passively between the embrasure of the two adjacent teeth. It should not stick out. Okay, we do not want the patient biting on that wire. In the figure 11, we can see that that part of the wire bending is done, and now the retentive tags have formed. You do not have to form intricate details to form a retentive tag. A simple 90-degree bend is enough. Some people also fabricate teardrop shaped retentive tag, even that will do. But simple 90-degree bend, as in this case we can see here, it is done in figure 12. It is clearly seen at the end of the retentive tag there is just a slight 90-degree bend, and that bend will act as a hook, and it will form a retentive block when it gets acrylized into the base plate. Make sure there is at least a thin air gap, about 1 mm of gap present between the palatal surface of the cast as well as the wire, so that the acrylic beautifully flows within that and it encapsulates the wire bendings. So we have here both the mesial and the distal retentive tags complete, and the bridge is at 45 degree to the buccal surface of the tooth, and mesially and distally we can see that the wire it's not standing out and it's passively sitting in the embrasure. Yeah, that's fabrication of Adam's clasp. The features of Adam's clasp represents when we talk about Adam's clasp, there are three parts of Adam's clasp which simply stand out. First is in figure A, we can see bridge of the Adam's clasp. We can see that the bridge is lying parallel to the buccal sulcus of the molar, but not the buccal surface. The functional purpose, I think, is because Adam's clasp was not used earlier just for retention purpose on a Holly's retainer, but it was also used for active orthodontic treatment. Even today, it is used for active orthodontic appliances. For example, say you have a face bow or the inner bow of the headgear. In that case, the inner bow of the headgear is placed on the buccal tubes, and those buccal tubes are to be soldered on the bridge of the Adam's clasp. Now imagine if you have a mesially or a distally rotated molar. In that case, how will you possibly place those inner bows into the rotated molar buccal tubes? It will not be possible. Patient cannot place it and remove it on its own, and secondly, it will result in undesired movements of molar as well as the maxilla. So the desired tooth movement and bone movement will not take place. So you have to make sure that the bridge of the clasp is parallel to the buccal sulcus and the arch form instead of the buccal contour of the tooth. Secondly, we have the arrowheads, the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal arrowheads. Make sure that they are slightly converging, not a lot, but just enough to follow the convexity of the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal undercut. It should not be diverging, it should be converging so that it encapsulates and it fits, it basically snugly fits the undercut of the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal area. And we have to make sure that they follow the gingival contour of the cervical gingiva. We can see here in picture B that it's following the gingival contour, and we can see that the bridge is at 45 degrees to the buccal surface of the tooth, and it's almost at half the height of the buccal surface of the tooth. Now we look at the picture D. So the picture D is basically showing how there is a fine thin hair gap between the palatal surface of the cast as well as the wire. All we have is that 90-degree slight bend at the free end of the retentive tag, which helps in encapsulating the clasp in place. When we acrylize any appliance, let us try to understand why acrylization is important. First of all, yes, acrylization, the base plate will help us act as a framework. It acts as a framework and holds all the wire components in place. That's true. Secondly, it has the purpose of nullifying all the forces that are produced. Say a Hollis appliance is used for retraction. In that case, what happens is some amount of force is being exerted on the upper anteriors to retract or to close a gap. When this is being done, according to the Newton's law, for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. Obviously, there will be some amount of force being exerted on other teeth. To nullify that, this force has to be distributed, this pressure has to be distributed on all the teeth so that no active undesired tooth movement takes place. So this is another purpose of base plate. You can also have an extended purpose of base plate when the same acrylic is covering incisors or for example in case of a bite plane or a inclined plane or a bite plate. In these cases what happens is it acts more like a functional appliance. So do not underestimate the power of acrylization or base plate. It has its own place in the fabrication of removable orthodontic appliances. Make sure that the thickness of the appliance base plate is not more than 1 to 2 mm thick. It need not even be 2 mm thick. It can be 1 mm thick all over, but only in areas where the retentive tags are running into the acrylic plate. In those areas, you can thicken the thickness of the base plate up to 2 mm. So 1 to 1.5 mm thickness is all that you need. If you make it extremely thick, thicker than 2 mm, then patient will have difficulty in speech. Patient may also have a gag reflex, and if he is so uncomfortable wearing the appliance, do you think the patient will wear the appliance? Not at all. Patient will not be compliant and patient will not be comfortable with the appliance. So CP Adams gave multiple variations of the original Adams clasp, and each has its own purpose. For example, over here on the right side, we can see a soldered J hook to the Adams clasp. It was used for engagement of elastic, and it is still used to this day. So this hook acts like a hook on fixed function on even the fixed orthodontic appliances, and it's used to engage elastics. It can also be used in semi-fixed appliances. Another picture we can see here, lower picture represents Adams clasp with a helix, and that again is for engagement elastics. The left upper picture represents Adams clasp. It's also called as double Adams clasp. So this double Adams clasp is basically for engaging two adjacent teeth. This can be done for posterior as well as anterior teeth. And CP Adams did not advocate use of double Adams clasp in anteriors. He was kind of against it, although he said that it can be used, but he somehow he did not agree with the use of Adams clasp for double Adams clasp for anteriors. In the picture below that, the second picture, we can see that there is an soldering of additional arrowhead. So basically the Adams clasp over here is on the first permanent molar, and on the premolar there is an additional mesial arrowhead which has been soldered to the bridge of the Adams clasp. So this can be done where additional retention is needed, and yeah, this is done to improve the retention, just like in double Adams clasp. Yeah. So a lower picture is for a single arrowhead Adams clasp. So this is basically a modification for the kind of tooth where the distal end is not at all erupted. So if there is no undercut at all, then in this case a single arrowhead clasp can be used. And over here on the right side we have another extended tag. So this is Adams clasp with a distal tag. So this is done to again engage elastics. All the modifications with helix and J hooks and distal tags are all extensions, are all examples of Adams clasp modification to engage elastics. We can also attach auxiliaries to Adams clasp. For example, you can solder a buccal tube to the bridge of the Adams clasp, and yeah, all such modifications can be carried out with Adams clasp. For example, in case of a hollow retainer, if it's an extraction case and first permanent molar was extracted to retract the teeth or correct crowding, after the extraction and retention of the treatment, to maintain the closed space of extraction and to avoid reopening of the space, you can solder the labial bow distal end. Instead of running the retentive tag of the labial bow between the the canine and the second premolar, there's a risk, because there's a risk of reopening of the extraction space when you run that wire through and through the early extraction site. So to avoid that, you can just continue the same labial bow after you form the loop. Continue the same labial bow distally and solder it to the bridge of the Adams clasp to avoid reopening of the extraction space. So these are just modifications of Adams clasp as auxiliaries to Adams clasp. This can be done. According to C.P. Adams, there are 5 main benefits of Adams clasp over any other clasp. First of all, they are small, they are compact, and they lie in a very small space in the buccal sulcus without any obstruction to the buccal sulcus or without taking excessive space in the base plate. Secondly, it can be used for any tooth for primary or permanent teeth. It can be used for even partly erupted teeth. And fourth is that it is strong, at the same time it is resilient, and you don't need any special pliers to fabricate it. So that's the 5 main advantages of Adams clasp, and these advantages were also given by C.P. Adams. So it's a small and a compact clasp which does not take too much space, and it's a clasp that can be used for primary as well as permanent teeth, fully erupted as well as partly erupted teeth, and the plier had the ability to be strong yet resilient, so it could bounce back if it was pushed in place. And last but not the least, to fabricate the appliance, you don't need any special expensive pliers. The single Adams universal plier would be more than enough. Now that we've learned about Adams clasp, we know that fabricating Adams clasp is not very easy. It's not like Jackson's clasp or like a circumferential clasp. It's not that simple. It will need a lot of practice, because the arrowheads and the angulations should all be perfect, and the number of times you modify the wire to remake those bends, the more stress you incorporate. The more stress you incorporate into the wire, the higher is the chance of the clasp breaking. So that's why if you fabricate the appliance in first shot, there's a lesser chance of breaking the clasp. So it needs a lot of practice. It needs good amount of skill to fabricate Adams clasp. If that is so, why is it that we still stuck with Adams clasp? Why is it that it is still the most commonly used clasp to fabricate orthodontic appliance? Because according to the studies, only about 3% of properly fabricated Adams clasp undergo fracture. Just 3%. That means that if you fabricate your Adams clasp in one shot, without any retakes, without any reopening of the bends and replacing of the bends, there is a very little chance that the clasp will break on its own. Yes, and we already know that this clasp is strong, this clasp is resilient, and it can be used for almost any tooth. If that is the case, why not use Adams clasp, isn't it? So that's the reason why Adams clasp should be your top priority when learning fabrication of removable orthodontic appliances. So C.P. Adams said that it is necessary to make the clasp touch the tooth only far enough below the level of the contact point to ensure adequate retention. What did he mean by that? He simply meant that we know that for a partly erupted tooth, what we have to do for fabrication of Adams clasp. We know that already. But what happens when a tooth is over erupted, extruded, or a tooth with gingival recession? In that case, you do not have to go all the way till the exposed end of the crown. Say a tooth is extruded. In that case, not only can you see the CEJ, you can see beyond the CEJ also. Does that mean you will extend the arrowheads all the way till the CEJ or beyond the CEJ? Not really. You just have to go enough. Like visibly, you should be able to see the undercut. If you got the depth of the arrowhead clasp to that extent, that's all you need. You don't have to go all the way to the CJ or to the cementum of the tooth to fabricate Adams clasp. It is not advocated because what happens is if you fabricate Adams clasp keeping that position in mind for such a tooth, in that case what you're actually creating is a deep undercut. And what happens is two of the possibilities can take place. First of all, the clasp will not fit the tooth at all. Okay, the clasp will not fit the tooth at all because when you're fabricating the Adams clasp, you're only fabricating the wire. So when you check for the passivity of the clasp, yes, the clasp will passively fit the tooth, although you have engaged the deep undercut on the gingivally recessed tooth or extruded tooth. But once you acrylize it, you have not only created a clasp that engages into the deep undercut, you have made it impossible for the clasp to move from its place because it has been acrylized. So after acrylization, suddenly you realize that the clasp will not fit on the tooth. That means that the patient will not be able to wear the appliance. Secondly, even if the patient somehow manages to push the wire in place and place the appliance in place, what will happen is the clasp will get deformed. It will get deformed because it's already gotten deformed, and after having pushed so much to place it in position, it will obviously get further deformed. And the problem with any active force in a clasp is that even a small amount of active force within a clasp results in movement of a tooth. Remember that you may think that activating the clasp just holds the clasp in place. What more can it do? How can it possibly damage the tooth? No, you're wrong. It can actually damage the tooth because actively placing force and bends into the clasp will result in movement of the tooth. And obviously, this is movement of a molar which we do not desire during the orthodontic treatment. So, what suggestions can we give the patient? Like I always do, I like to end the lecture with that. So, say you've given a patient a Holly sweetener. In that case, most patients have a tendency to simply bite on the Holly's plate and position it in their mouth. They prefer to do that than using their hands to position the appliance. You have to educate them and let them know that they are not supposed to bite onto their plates, but they are supposed to position them and remove them with their hands. All they are supposed to do is use their index finger bilaterally. The left and the right index finger are supposed to be placed on the bridge on the left and the right Adams clasp, and the bridge is supposed to be tucked down. That's it. A tucking force on the bridge is all that they need to remove the appliance, and similarly to place the appliance also the same bridge is used to position the appliance posteriorly. Okay, they are not supposed to bite on it. Also, we have to discourage patients from repeated placement and removal of the clasp. Basically what happens is if they repeatedly place it and remove it, you'll have to place bends into the clasp to adjust the clasp. And repeated placement and removal of bends, we already know it will result in stress and compression, hence results in breakage of the clasp. Yeah. Alright friends, that's all for today. I hope you learned a thing or two about Adams clasp, and yeah, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Until the next lecture, see you soon.